He being an author, a story writer, he will tell you all about his work with PaperClip and other means of writing. Go ahead, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Robert, and it's great to be here today. And it's also great to hang around all of you and also these wonderful machines that are still going strong after 35, 40 years. It's truly incredible. And games are great. We love games, but we forget how many businesses were run on Commodore 64s. Like, for example, I was just reading that there was an auto shop in Poland that was still running their business on a Commodore 64 in 2018. So yes, there was a lot of great productivity software. Now, as an author, the most important tool is a word processor. And the word processor that I used on my first computer, Commodore 64, was PaperClip. In fact, I have the pin from the makers of PaperClip, batteries included. This is Herbie, their mascot, and he's actually in their logo and on the title page of their user guide. So let's go back down memory lane about what writing used to be like with typewriters. Because, first of all, when I was going to, I had what was considered a state-of-the-art typewriter. My mom bought me for, I believe, Hanukkah in 1978, a Sears electric typewriter. And it was really cool because it had a correction ribbon on it, which is just like liquid paper. You just type over the character you made your mistake on, and then you can just keep typing over it. As was usually the case, the correction ribbon ran out long before the ink ribbon. But the other thing about typing with a typewriter is when you're writing term papers for college, you had to fit certain requirements for margins, both top and bottom. And when you're typing your page, it's really hard to see where your bottom is. So what I had to do was to buy this plastic undersheet that I put under my typewriter paper, and it had all the official college rule margins on it. And that indicated where to start typing footnotes, where the bottom margin is. And like everything else, that plastic undersheet, because it keeps getting hit on by the keys, it wore out after a number of term papers as well. I had to go through several of those a year. So in 1983, I started my first computer industry job with a company called Entech. And tomorrow I will talk about one of their marquee programs, Studio 64, the music program. So I'll talk a little bit more about Entech tomorrow. But Entech introduced me to writing with computers. You select many commands by pressing the command key, or in this case, Control. And I'm going to go ahead and load a file. I went Command L. And what I did here was I typed the first chat paragraphs of my novel, Amiga, into PaperClip. So, just like WordStar, PaperClip uses formatting codes to do a lot of the formatting. So the check mark is you enter that by pressing pound, the pound key, which is a standalone key, as you know, on a C64 keyboard. And then PaperClip sticks a check mark, and then you can string together a number of formatting codes by delimiting them with a colon. So what I did here was left margin 10, right margin 80, although this should be 70 actually. And then AI plus 5, which means it automatically indents each paragraph 5 spaces. And then SP2 for double spacing. And with a single command, I've done a very simple formatting for doing for standard manuscript format that you would use to submit to a manuscript to a publication. And one of the things that I found is like when I started using graphical word processors like Microsoft Word, I think was for Word for Windows, before they really started implementing style sheets, I had to format things manually or copy and paste formatting. But with PaperClip, in a way, this was in a way a bit ahead of its time, where you basically could set up a style for your document by entering a few codes. And then you can do various things with formatting, like this is CN1. What that does is it centers these two, the chapter 1 in July 1985. And then you do another check mark to CN0 to turn off centering. And you can do all sorts of things with formatting. Full justified, left, a line left, a line right. So it was using these codes, it became very simple to apply various formats to a document. And then, of course, you type, like you normally do. Now, with PaperClip 64, you're editing in 40-column mode. When they came out with PaperClip for the C128, then there was an 80-column mode if your monitor supports it. So I think what I wound up doing, until I got my Amiga, I used an old black and white television set instead of a composite monitor. So I think I was stuck with 40 columns for a while. But one of the things as I started digging into PaperClip, it was very sophisticated in terms of the things you can do with it. Like a very popular thing at the time was mail merge. So the idea is, like, if you're writing a form letter and you're going to send it out to a bunch of people, what you do is you create a sequential file, which is a list of all the names that you want and addresses. And then you put in fields in the PaperClip where you want those inserted. And then it will go through and insert those. You can generate a mail merge and it'll spit out documents with all your names and the appropriate names and addresses. So it's a very handy feature. That also, it also does spell checking. I'm trying to make sure I wrote the command. One nice little thing was that I not only found the D64 file for PaperClip, I found the user guide in PDF, and I think I was talking to somebody before about, with some of these programs and hardware products, you need a manual because a lot of things are not very obvious when you're looking at them. And fortunately, I did find a PDF for PaperClip. But I left that on my computer, which I left at home. So
we can look it up.
Yeah,
I can find it on my phone.
Yeah, but it did have spell check, and it also had cut, copy, and paste, which to me was a big lifesaver when I was writing term papers in college. Because the first thing that's frustrating is when you're writing a document and you realize you made a typo, and we all make typos, but you're turning it in to your professor, and the problem is that when you're typing it on a typewriter, you have to retype the whole page and hope that the page ends at the right ending word, because if it doesn't, you might have to type the pages that come after it. Of course, with PaperClip, or with really easy, just to go in and, and type, text wherever you want it. Well, this does overview. Let's see.
So,
Yeah, there is an insert mode. I think it's insert. That's better. Still not. There is an insert mode. It does either overwrite or insert. Now, the way that cut, copy, and paste works, it's a little bit different from what we're used to, because we're used to Control-C, Control-X, and Control-V. PaperClip is a little bit different. You use Control-R, and you're setting the range. Go ahead and do Control-C to copy. Sorry, you have to go Command-R again to end the range. Then you can go Command-C to copy. See, that's the advantage of demos, is that you so you can do one copy. There you go. So, and you can insert multiple copies. So it works a little bit differently than working with the clipboard. And then there is a thing called a transfer, where instead of using cut, it's Command-T, and you can go ahead and cut that into storage. And then there's a Command-P to paste. So it's different from the standards, because now cut, copy, and paste are like system-wide commands that go to a clipboard. That was something that was started with the Mac. So it's a different now when, back at this time when every program had its own way of doing cut, copy, and paste. Now, in terms of output, first of all, one of the it took me a while to save up some money, but I did finally get an Epson RX80 printer, 9-pin dot matrix, and as you know, dot matrix printers are very slow, and you want to be able to get a preview of what your document work looks like before you start, using up a lot of ink ribbons and paper. So PaperClip has a video preview mode, which is Command-V.
it says fill variable blocks.
Yeah.
This is a different thing.
And you can, this is a 40-column preview, so you can scroll it.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
And, of course, with the C128 version, you can do an 80-column. And this was back when, this was actually one of the few times when it really was what you see is what you get, because text was, again, this was not matrix. Text was, each character had its own, it was the same shape. And certainly if you were, and we were talking about space, characters of spacing, There's a lot of sophisticated spacing you can do because it bases it, I believe the default is like 6 characters or 6 lines per inch, but you can adjust that as you need it. You can also do narrow, you could support wide paper or narrow your documents. So there's a lot that you can do with writing in a Commodore 64, it's a Commodore 64 program. Now, so I was able to write a lot of my term papers with PaperClip, and I did it at a fraction of the time. So instead of having to retype everything, I could just modify my files and generate a new copy. And I actually had a professor like that, Robert Oliphant, and I had him for a number of creative writing classes, and what he wanted to do, he basically taught us the fundamentals of writing, which is create the best first draft you can, get feedback from people, edit it, and then update your document versus, with your changes. And what we had to do was submit both the original and the updated copy as part of our final project. He said that he wanted to show the taxpayers of California that we were actually doing work. Yeah. So he had these wonderful binders of things, of our writing projects. Well, of course, the first few years I was, this was when I'm still writing with a typewriter. So of course editing meant retyping everything with all the edits. But then when I got PaperClip and started writing with a computer, it was just a matter of editing my documents and just printing out a new copy. And of course I could save multiple versions. I could save my original and the updated copy. So it saved a lot of time in terms of writing term papers. And it's something that we don't think about today because we've been using word processors to write for 35, 40 or so years. But this was a big, big change in how I wrote. The biggest writing project that I did was for a novel writing class. This was my professor was Dr. Jewel Parker Rhodes, who became a New York Times bestselling author. And one of the big challenges with PaperClip is you're limited in your storage space. I don't remember what the maximum file size is. I was trying to look that up before coming here today. But you can imagine that you got a 64K computer. You've got program space, and I think they did write it in assembly. But still, you're limited to how much RAM you have. And you also have to be able to consider how much space you're going to have on your floppy disks, because those are limited in space. PaperClip has a really useful feature for handling long documents. They're called global documents. So what you do is you create a reference document with links to all the sub-documents. And then you could print them all together. You could do searches through all together. And that was how I took on this novel writing project. And I found the floppy disk for it. And I was able to load it into one of our 1541 drives here. I think it's that C16 over there. I can still read this disk. Now, if I can figure out a way to get I know there are tools to do that, to get the data from this disk onto this USB stick, then I could theoretically open this novel and read it in PaperClip on this C64 Mini. And I could be looking at a novel that I wrote 40 years ago. So,
are you going to be here tomorrow?
Yes, I will be here tomorrow.
I can bring my laptop with a Zoom floppy. You just connect the Zoom floppy and then read the disc.
Oh, wow. That would be so wonderful.
You know?
Or we could do it a different way. The Commodore 128 has a program called Z 0.77, and Z can read virtually any C64, C128 document file and convert it to whatever format you want, like, for example, straight text, if you want straight text.
Wow.
So it
But
will
then it's still
definitely,
on the Commodore, right? He
Yeah.
wants it on this USB stick.
right. So it will definitely, I mean, with Z, will definitely read a paperclip file, and
Yeah.
it will definitely save it as a text file. You could save it as a text file, to an SD card or whatever, and then you could read it off, off your laptop computer or desktop computer.
That would be neat to be able to read it off, both ways, being able to use it in paperclip and then actually bring it into, a modern computer.
Uh-huh.
That would be really neat. So, yeah, I will be here tomorrow, so I will remember to bring my laptop tomorrow. But one of the things that's really interesting is that the idea of breaking apart a document into files, it actually is something we do today. We still do that today. And where I work as a technical writer, we use DITA, which has been sort of a popular standard for writing documentation with XML file formats. It's been around since, I think, we've been using it since 2010, so it's a fairly modern technology. Most people who are technical writers are using DITA. But what's really funny is that DITA follows the same basic principle. We have a map file with links to individual XML files with the individual file content. So it's interesting how that paradigm still it works 40 years. Even though we have technology where you can write a single document as one long file, it just works a lot better when you chunk things up. And I follow that same standard with writing today. There's a program I use called Scrivener. And it's the same idea where you take a manuscript and you break it up into individual scenes, and then you put it all together in this binder format, and you can print them and print it together and search and work across files. But it really helps you think about seeing a novel scene by scene. Or if you're writing a technical document, you think about it by topic. So it's interesting that even though the technology has evolved from this, there's a lot of good, useful principles that we're still using today. Now, my experience with programs like PaperClip figured into the novel that I wrote about my experiences in the Commodore world, which it's called Amiga, which is one of the books I have on sale here at the show. And I wanted to share a scene where I talk about PaperClip and how it fits into my story. We also had a lot of work to do. We started polishing the product the moment we came back from CES. Caitlin found more bugs to fix. Peter took care of those while I started writing a user's manual. It would have been better if we hired a dedicated technical writer, but we didn't have the budget. We needed that money for packaging and floppy disk labels. Those of you who have been involved in software development probably understand that. And what's funny was, as a technical writer at Entech, we also did our user guide in PaperClip. So I'll go on. Fortunately, I wrote enough policy and procedures documents at the bank and the CSUN computer lab that I could produce decent user documentation. I had set up my Peter's Commodore 128, next to the Amiga so I could write while using the software. I used a program called PaperClip 128. I used the Commodore 64 version to write papers in college, so I was already familiar with it. I was glad that I could write in 80 columns without having to squint to figure out the characters. I wrote in the mornings when I had the Amiga to myself. Daryl was at work. Mrs. Posner, Caitlin, and Peter were watching TV after breakfast. The TV murmured in the background. It was a typical Tuesday morning. We had a brief break from the rain, but it was near freezing at night. The Posner's house had a good heater, but the living room was a little drafty. I had to wear my CSUN sweatshirt. I was writing the procedure on how to take the picture. Maria's changes made it much easier to describe how to do it, but I still had to figure out how to describe it to photographers who never used a computer and computer users who never took a photograph. I leaned close to the screen to look at a step I just wrote. Ah! The scream came from the dining room. It was Kathleen. Kathleen. I shot out of the chair and dashed to the room. Now, if you, little clue, what do you think? The thing that Kathleen was watching, let's just say it happened on January 28th, 1986.
Challenger.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that I write about, is when I write about that period of time and this period in technology in my novel, Amiga. And if you're interested, I have copies on sale here at the show, autographed copies, of course. And I want to thank all of you for your attention, and I will be glad to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
So you said you had a spell checker, too.
Yes.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Did it all
Yes.
fit on one disc, or was there a separate disc for the spell checker?
At one point, they did have a separate disc for that. Yes, and now unfortunately I don't have the command for that off the top of my head, but it was a very, it was a basic spell checker, but it did catch it. Yeah, it had it.
Try Control Y.
Control Y?
I guess not.
No. Yes.
Matthew, why did you choose PaperClip 64 when there were other word processors on the market?
Because I like the fact that when I started working with PaperClip, I mean, this was in '83, the word processors that we tried out were actually pretty limited. What PaperClip offered was, it was a very sophisticated program. There was, as you can see, there were a lot of features and a lot of things that it was capable of doing. And it was also, and also its formatting capabilities with this command with the control line made it very easy. I think when I moved from the C64 to the Amiga, I started using WordPerfect. And I mean, with WordPerfect, I mean, here we are, which is I know WordPerfect had its limitations, but also it was a professional level. It was considered one of the leading word processors at the time. But there was one big problem when I switched from the C64 to the Amiga to do writing, was that like for example, I wrote for Run magazine, and one of the problems was they used Commodore 64s for their writing and editing, and the problem is that Amiga, Commodore uses PETSCI, and Amiga uses ASCII. So they had problems reading Amiga files, and they had to tell me, please, you write in your C64 because we can't read your files.
Yeah.
But the frustrating thing was that I was working at AST, and became used to the PC keyboard and where all the keys are. And the Amiga uses a PC-style keyboard. The Amiga doesn't. So it was very difficult to, we finger memory, we developed muscle memory. So it was very hard to go from the PC writing on a PC keyboard for 8 hours at work, writing, I could easily transition to the Amiga keyboard, but having to go back to the Commodore 64's keyboard was difficult. The other little thing about using the Commodore 64 for writing was this was when, we talk about work from home as a fairly new thing. This was also a way for me to work from home as well, because my mom was disabled from a stroke, so I had to come home and help her out. But I may have work that I still have to do with my writing, with my technical writing. So I can put my data on a floppy disk and carry it home and continue working from home. And that actually has gotten harder to do unless you just physically take your laptop home, which is what we do have a work from home policy where I work today. But if you had a PC at your desk and you had a PC at home, even if it's the same type of computer, corporations now do all sorts of things like locking down the ports. They make it difficult for you to just email things. You might be able to, if they give you access to something like Google Drive, you can do that, but it's actually a lot more involved than just putting your files on a floppy disk and taking them home like we were able to do back then. Does anybody else have anything?
Okay, thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.